Have you ever stopped to think about what's really going on deep inside your jaw, way beyond just your teeth? It's this complex and honestly often overlooked world where some really fascinating and sometimes kind of surprising things can develop. Welcome to the deep dive. Today we are plunging right into odontogenic cysts and tumors. Now, I know that sounds maybe super specialized, like heavy medical jargon, right? But our mission here is to give you a shortcut, a way to understand these, well, relatively uncommon, but still incredibly diverse and significant things, lesions that pop up in the oral and maxillofacial region. Think of it like we're doing the heavy lifting through the dense source material for you. We've pulled the most important nuggets from expert medical chapter excerpts, really dense stuff, actually. Our goal is to give you a clear picture of how they present clinically, what they look like on x-rays, how they tend to behave over time, and even the intricate biology behind them. So let's unpack this fascinating, sometimes puzzling world that, believe it or not, arises directly from the very process that forms our teeth in the first place.
It really is quite something, isn't it? That the same cellular processes designed to build our teeth can, if they go slightly off track, become the starting point for such a variety of jaw lesions. The term odontogenic itself tells the story. It just means derived from tooth-forming tissues. It points right to that fundamental connection.
That's a great place to start. So if these lesions literally spring from how teeth develop, does that mean they're basically like biological leftovers gone a bit rogue? Or is it more complicated than that?
Well, it's a bit of both, really. To get it, we probably need a quick primer on tooth formation itself, odontogenesis. It's this incredibly complex dance involving three main tissues. You've got the enamel organ, which is epithelial, and then the dental follicle and dental papilla, which are ectomose and chymal. Now, normally during development, structures like the dental lamina, think of it as scaffolding, they fragment and just disappear, poof. But if tiny little islands of that lamina hang around, they're widely believed to be the source material for a lot of these odontogenic cysts and tumors, like tiny dormant blueprints that suddenly get reactivated somehow.
Okay, so tiny remnants. But what actually makes them suddenly, kick off and become a full lesion, sounds like it boils down to cellular control, right? This delicate balance between cells growing proliferation and cells dying off on schedule, which is apoptosis. And when that balance gets tipped, that's when problems start.
Precisely. When that balance shifts towards uncontrolled growth, proliferation, we start seeing different kinds of issues pop up. And these are broadly classified into two main buckets: odontogenic cysts and odontogenic tumors. Now, while both are lesions found in the jaws, their basic nature, how they behave, and, really importantly, how they need to be treated can be dramatically different.
Right. So let's start with the cysts then. Our sources say most jaw cysts are lined by epithelium derived from those tooth-forming cells we talked about. But I'm guessing they aren't all the same thing.
Oh, definitely not. They get subclassified based on their origin. Are they developmental, meaning they kind of form as part of that tooth-making process going slightly awry? Or are they inflammatory, maybe a reaction to infection? The dentigerous cyst is probably the classic example of a developmental one.
Okay, dentigerous cysts. Now, lots of people deal with impacted wisdom teeth, right? It seems pretty common. And our sources point to a direct link here. These dentigerous cysts are most often found connected to those unerupted third molars. And interestingly, they're often found completely by accident, just serendipitously on routine dental x-rays.
Yeah, that's very common. And what's really key to know about these, they typically show up in people aged 10 to 30, is their classic look on an x-ray. It's a well-defined unilocular radiolucency. That just means a single, clear, dark area that specifically surrounds the crown part of an unerupted tooth.
Okay, that's a helpful visual. A single dark space around the crown. But I can imagine a surgeon looking at that x-ray and thinking, is this just a slightly enlarged dental follicle, which can be normal, or is it a true cyst?
Yeah.
Sounds like it could be tricky.
It absolutely can be a diagnostic dilemma. And here's a really critical nugget from the sources for you to remember. Any dark area you see on an x-ray around the crown of an unerupted tooth, that's the pericoronal radiolucency if it measures bigger than, say, 4 or 5 millimeters. That's considered highly suggestive of actual cyst formation. It really warrants getting a sample for microscopic examination to be sure.
Ah, okay. So there's a size threshold that kind of pushes it from maybe normal to needs investigation. That's a crucial detail.
It really is. And even though most of these dentigerous cysts have an excellent prognosis, you treat them with simple enucleation, basically scooping the whole cyst out along with removing the tooth. It is absolutely paramount that all the tissue removed gets sent for histopathologic examination every single time.
Why is that so critical if most are benign?
Because, and this is a big because highlighted in the sources in rare cases, much nastier things like squamous cell carcinoma or mucoepidermoid carcinoma or even an ameloblastoma can arise from or in association with what looks like a standard dentigerous cyst. That's a huge so what, isn't it? It means you just can't assume. Every single one needs that microscopic check.
Wow, okay. That is a powerful warning.
Yeah.
A seemingly simple find could hide something much more serious. All right, let's move on to one that, well, the name itself sounds a bit more problematic, the Odontogenic Cyst, or OKC. Our sources call it a distinctive form of developmental odontogenic cyst that deserves special consideration. Why distinctive? What makes it more concerning?
Well, for starters, it tends to be more aggressive locally than other common odontogenic cysts. Plus, it has a significantly higher tendency to recur after treatment. We're talking around 30% in many studies, which is quite high. And it grows differently. Unlike dentigerous cysts that might just expand passively due to fluid pressure, OKCs seem to grow because of inherent factors in the cyst lining itself, maybe enzymatic activity in the wall. It's more active.
Active, okay. And you mentioned dentigerous cysts usually look like a single dark space unilocular. How does an OKC typically look on an X-ray?
OKCs most often appear multilocular. That means they look like they have multiple connected compartments or spaces on the X-ray, almost like a soap bubble or honeycomb appearance. However, they can sometimes be unilocular, which, as you can imagine, can definitely lead to confusion with a dentigerous cyst or other things.
And here's something interesting. If a clinician sees multiple of these multilocular lesions, it's not just a local jaw issue anymore, is it? That seems to wave a big red flag for something systemic.
It absolutely does. Finding multiple OKCs should immediately make you think about a much broader condition. Nevoid basal cell carcinoma syndrome. You might also hear it called Gorlin syndrome.
Gorlin syndrome. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, isn't it? The sources say finding these multiple jaw cysts is often the very first sign that tips someone off to having this inherited condition. It's not just about the jaw. It links out to the whole body.
That's exactly right. It's an autosomal dominant syndrome, meaning you only need one copy of the gene, and it has high penetrance, so if you inherit it, you're very likely to show signs. Although, how it expresses can vary a lot between people. Patients can have a whole constellation of features. Multiple basal cell carcinomas, those skin cancers, often appearing early in life and on skin that isn't even sun exposed. They might have distinct facial features like a prominent forehead frontal bossing or widely spaced eyes, that's hypertelorism. You can even see skeletal issues like split ribs, bifid ribs, or calcification in parts of the brain lining like the falx cerebri. And often you see these very characteristic little pits on the palms of their hands and soles of their feet, palmar plantar pits.
Wow, that is an incredible range of symptoms, all potentially connected back to finding these cysts in the jaw. So treating the OKCs in someone with Gorlin syndrome must be more complicated then.
It is. Because of the underlying genetics, what looks like a recurrence might actually be a brand new cyst forming. It's like the tissue is just predisposed. So often, a technique called marsupialization is preferred initially. You surgically create an opening into the cyst, letting it drain and shrink over time. This can make a later, more definitive removal less invasive and hopefully preserve more jaw structure.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, besides those two big ones, there were a couple of other cysts mentioned in our sources that seem noteworthy. The glandular odontogenic cyst. Sounds rare, maybe tricky.
Yes, it's rare, but the sources flag it as potentially aggressive. Despite being uncommon, its behavior and that recurrence rate, also around 30%, make it important. It has glandular features in its lining, usually found in middle-aged adults, often in the front part of the lower jaw, the anterior mandible. Definitely one where you want accurate diagnosis early on. And then there's the calcifying odontogenic cyst, or COC. This one's uncommon too, and its hallmark is something called ghost cell keratinization. Basically, you see these dead cells under the microscope that still weirdly retain their outline. Very distinctive. What's really fascinating about the COC, though, is its kind of dual personality. It can behave like a simple non-neoplastic cyst, or it can act like a true tumor, a neoplasm. In fact, the WHO classification now groups it as a calcifying cystic odontogenic tumor.
Huh, interesting. A cyst that's sometimes a tumor. Okay, that was a lot to unpack just on cysts. It definitely sounds like even these seemingly simple fluid-filled sacs require really careful investigation. So now let's switch gears and cross over to the other side. Odontogenic tumors. What's the big picture here? Are these generally more serious?
Well, it's complex. Some are definitely true tumors. They have uncontrolled, often progressive growth, but others are actually considered hamartomas. A hamartoma is essentially a localized jumble, a malformation of tissues that belong in that area but are disorganized. They tend to grow along with the person and then stop. It's less about aggressive invasion and more about disorganized growth. And making that distinction, tumor versus hamartoma, is absolutely critical for understanding how they'll behave and, crucially, how you treat them.
Okay, hamartoma versus true tumor. Got it. And our sources say that topping the frequency charts are odontomas. They're apparently the most common odontogenic tumor, outnumbering all the others combined. But you just said some are hamartomas, so odontomas fit that category.
Exactly. Odontomas are considered hamartomas, not true tumors. They come in two main flavors. You have compound odontomas. These look like lots of tiny, miniature, malformed, but recognizable tooth-like structures all bundled together. Usually find those in the front of the upper jaw, the anterior maxilla. Then you have complex odontomas. These are just irregular, chaotic masses of hard dental tissues, enamel, dentin with no real organization, typically found in the back of the jaw's posterior regions. But here's the good news for you. Because they're basically developmental glitches, you treat them with simple surgical removal enucleation and they don't come back. Relatively straightforward.
Okay, that's reassuring. A common finding, but usually an easy fix. Let's shift gears now to something that sounds, well, considerably more serious, the ameloblastoma. Our sources describe this one as the most common, clinically significant, and potentially lethal odontogenic tumor. Those words definitely grab your attention.
They absolutely should. The ameloblastoma is known for being locally aggressive and highly infiltrative. It can really invade the surrounding bone. And what's fascinating and also quite unsettling is this debate highlighted in the literature. Essentially be considered malignant, at least in their behavior. Why? Because of their relentless local invasiveness and their high tendency to recur if not completely removed. They draw an analogy to basal cell carcinoma of the skin, technically benign because it rarely metastasizes, but highly destructive locally. Ameloblastomas are definitely aggressive, infiltrative, and can be quite unpredictable.
Okay, so definitely not something to underestimate. The sources break it down into three main variants. Let's start with the most common one. The solid or multicystic ameloblastoma makes up about 92% of cases, often in the lower jaw, especially the back molaramus area, and usually shows up as a painless swelling. How does it look on X-ray?
Radiographically, it typically shows that multilocular radiolucency, again, that honeycomb or soap bubble pattern we mentioned with OKCs. And you often see significant root resorption of the adjacent teeth, meaning the tumor is literally eating away at their roots. Now, for this variant, the treatment recommendation from the sources is pretty clear and aggressive. Resection surgical removal with 1.0 centimeter linear bony margins. That means taking out the tumor plus a full centimeter of healthy-looking bone all around it, confirmed with x-rays during the surgery.
Wow, a full centimeter of healthy bone. That sounds like quite extensive surgery. Why such a wide margin?
It's because this tumor is so infiltrative. Attempts to just scoop it out like you would a cyst often lead to what the sources carefully call persistent disease, rather than true recurrence.
Persistent disease versus recurrence. What's the significance there?
It's not just semantics. Persistent disease implies that you actually left behind microscopic tumor cells during the initial surgery because you didn't get wide enough margins. These cells can then regrow, sometimes years or even decades later. True recurrence would mean the tumor came back from scratch, perhaps due to some underlying genetic instability. But with ameloblastoma, the issue is often incomplete removal the first time around. Those leftover cells are the problem.
That's a really chilling thought, leaving microscopic bits behind that can cause problems way down the line. It really underscores the aggressive nature. Okay, now the second type, the unicystic ameloblastoma. This one sounds particularly interesting because it tends to hit younger patients more often and frequently looks like a unilocular radiolucency on X-ray, potentially mimicking a simple dentigerous cyst.
Exactly. It's a potential diagnostic trap. Looks like a cyst, but it's actually an ameloblastoma. However, the good news here, according to the sources, is that this variant can often be treated more conservatively than the solid multicystic type. But, and this is a critical, but it depends entirely on the histologic findings, what the pathologist sees under the microscope. If the tumor growth is confined within the cyst lining, what they call luminal or intraluminal types, then thorough enucleation and curettage, scraping the cavity, can often be curative with a lower recurrence rate, maybe 10–20%.
Okay, so if it stays inside the cyst wall, maybe less aggressive surgery. But I sense there's another side to that coin.
There is. If the microscopic examination shows that the tumor has actually started to infiltrate into the cyst wall itself, that's called the mural variant, then it behaves much more aggressively. In those cases, it might need to be treated with resection, just like the solid multicystic type, to prevent that persistent disease we talked about. It just hammers home how absolutely crucial that detailed pathology report is for guiding the surgeon's hand. And then finally, just briefly, there's the peripheral ameloblastoma. It's the rarest, shows up as a bump on the gums, doesn't usually invade the bone deeply, and is typically treated with a wide local excision of the soft tissue.
Got it. So 3 distinct types with different behaviors and treatment implications. Let's quickly touch on a couple of other important tumors that our sources highlighted. The odontogenic myxoma. It's benign technically, but I think you mentioned it has a tricky reputation.
It certainly does. While it's not malignant, it's known for having, quote, aggressive behavior and a high recurrence rate if you don't get it all out. Part of the problem is its texture. It's kind of gelatinous, slimy almost, which can make it really hard for the surgeon to tell where the tumor stops and healthy bone begins. Easy to leave bits behind. On x-rays, it can sometimes show this unique stepladder or tennis racket string pattern between bone trabeculae, which can be a clue. But because it's so infiltrative, the recommendation again is usually resection with 1.0 centimeter bony margins, similar to the solid ameloblastoma.
Okay, so another one where benign doesn't mean simple treatment. And then there was the calcifying epithelial odontogenic tumor, also known as the Pinborg tumor.
Right, the Pinborg tumor. This one's rare, but also known for being quite infiltrative and locally destructive. Histologically, it's famous for having these distinct structures called Lees-Gang rings. They look like concentric calcified circles, and also this amyloid-like protein material, very characteristic under the microscope. And because of its aggressive local behavior, it's generally treated similarly to the ameloblastoma and the odontogenic myxoma with resection.
It feels like a recurring theme. Aggressive local behavior needing aggressive local treatment. But maybe there's a brighter spot. The Edematous odontogenic tumor, or AOT. This sounds different.
Ah, yes, the AOT. This is perhaps the most encouraging story in the whole odontogenic tumor section. Many experts actually regard it as a hamartoma, like the odontoma, rather than a true tumor. Our sources note it's almost exclusively found in young patients, teenagers, and young adults, particularly in the front part of the jaws, the anterior region, and very often it's found associated with an unerupted canine tooth.
So, specific age group, specific location, often with a canine. What about its behavior?
This is the truly remarkable part. Its prognosis is excellent. It's typically well encapsulated. Think of it like having a nice capsule around it, making it easy for the surgeon to shell out cleanly. Simple enucleation is curative. Get this. The sources mention a large review of almost 500 cases where only one single acceptable case of recurrence was reported.
Wow, one out of nearly 500. That's incredible.
It really is an incredibly high success rate. It's the definite good news story in a field that often involves some really complex and aggressive lesions.
That's great to hear. Now, just to cover all bases, it's important to briefly mention that true malignant odontogenic tumors, while very rare, do actually exist.
Correct. Absolutely, yes. Though thankfully very uncommon, they are part of the spectrum. You have things like the metastasizing ameloblastoma. This is really strange. Under the microscope, it looks just like a regular benign ameloblastoma, but for reasons we don't fully understand, it has the ability to spread to distant sites, most commonly the lungs. And then you have ameloblastocarcinoma. This is different here. The tumor cells themselves show features of malignancy. They look cancerous under the microscope, and this type can also metastasize.
Okay, so those really underscore the full and sometimes quite unpredictable spectrum of how these odontogenic lesions can behave, from totally benign hamartomas that are easily cured, all the way to aggressive local invaders, and even, rarely, to outright cancers that can spread. Wow, what a journey that was, deep into the oral and maxillofacial region. From those tiny little leftover bits of dental lamina to these really complex, sometimes aggressive tumors. It's an incredibly diverse and surprisingly intricate world, isn't it?
It truly is. And what really stands out to me as we wrap this up is just the immense importance of getting the diagnosis right. It so often requires more than just the clinical picture or the x-ray. That rigorous histopathologic analysis, actually looking at the tissue under a microscope, is absolutely critical because the distinction between, say, a harmless hamartoma and a potentially life-threatening tumor, or even just between different variants of the same lesion, like with the unicystic ameloblastoma, that distinction can completely change the treatment plan and the patient's prognosis.
Yeah, absolutely. And also that constant need for vigilance you highlighted. From that seemingly small detail, the 4 to 5 millimeter rule for suspecting a dentigerous cyst. to knowing about the higher recurrence rates with OKCs, requiring maybe different treatment or closer follow-up, all the way to understanding why those aggressive resections are sometimes necessary for things like a ameloblastoma. It's definitely not a one-size-fits-all field. Each lesion really demands its own tailored approach.
So think about this. You've just seen how cells involved in something as fundamental and normal as making teeth can, under certain circumstances, go off script and lead to this incredibly wide, unpredictable range of conditions, some totally benign, some truly aggressive. What does that maybe tell us about the hidden potential, or perhaps the hidden vulnerabilities, lurking within seemingly normal cellular processes elsewhere in our bodies? It really makes you ponder how biology, even at its most basic functional levels, still holds so many secrets, so many pathways we don't fully understand yet, doesn't it?